All right, everyone. Welcome. Tanmay, welcome. Super excited to chat with
Welcome.
you, man, today.
Yeah, super pumped. It's been a long time coming.
Yes, yeah. We have folks joining. We'll give a couple of minutes for folks to join. For those of who are punctual, thank you. If while we give other people a couple of minutes, would love to just hear from people if you want to type in your favorite AI applications or specifically if you've tried 11 Labs, any of the products, any use cases that you want to share. We could hopefully make this like a fun discussion based on that.
I love that Vern, you're spruiking 11 laps for me now.
Oh, you can do so much with it, right? It's like such a
What can't you do?
what can't you do?
I think I still love the story you gave of when we first met for 11 Labs, how you're using 11 Reader and you do sort of deep
Yeah,
research, upload that into 11 Reader, and then
yeah,
use that while you walk around. So I
yeah,
still
yeah,
use 11 Reader for that sort of stuff as well.
yeah.
Don't be shy, team.
All right, you can see folks joining in. We'll probably give like 30 more seconds and then go ahead and get started. Um, I'm wearing a wired headphone after 10 years for this today, typically. So I can't remember the last time I had a wired headphone on, but I wanted to make sure the audio does not cut off. So, okay, I guess we can go ahead and get started. Tanmay, thanks again for your time. I'm super excited for this conversation. I think, as many of you know, 11 Labs is one of the most iconic AI application companies of our time. It has transformed how voice AI is used in plethora of use cases. Within 4 years of the company being started, it has, reached 500 million plus in ARR. Uh, and not $11 billion in valuation, which that seems like is very intentional at some level. But a phenomenal success, one of the biggest AI success stories worldwide, in my opinion. Tanmay, would love if you can quickly introduce yourself. What is your role there? And we can go ahead and get started from there on.
Yeah, so I'm Tanmay. I based out of London, but my role is as the growth lead for the 11 Labs mobile app, which is our flagship app. Growth is kind of an interesting term at 11 Labs. It means I'm effectively the GM. I'm responsible for core product management. I'm responsible for core product growth, product marketing, user acquisition. So all
Yeah,
of the things a product manager will do, all the way through to revenue growth. And I get to work with a team of amazing engineers to make that happen.
amazing. How big is the team for mobile?
Yeah, so the team now is 6 engineers, one designer, and I think our last public announcement was that we went from zero to $10 million of ARR in less than 6 months,
In
which
in just mobile revenue.
yeah, just mobile revenue,
Wow.
just the flagship app.
Wow.
So that's been quite cool, and I think we actually benchmarked that, and we're in the top like 0.2% of mobile app revenue growth. And so we'll hear more about it later, but it's been a super fun journey.
That's amazing. So the team is like you're the growth lead, which looks at like everything from like what to build, how to acquire users, how to activate them, how to monetize them, and you're
Yeah.
a team of 6 engineers. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. People are
Wow.
surprised how thinly staffed 11 Labs can be, considering, you mentioned $500 million of ARR, 11 bill of revenue. You're also looking at the part-time data analyst as well for the 11 Labs app.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so six and a half people, I guess. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I'm curious, and I think this is like, probably what has dramatically changed in like how, great products are built in the AI era. But when you think about like you have a very lean team, trying to move fast, the goals are ambitious. Um, How, I'm curious, like, what was the problem around like customer intelligence that stood up, right? Like, what was the stack you looked around of like, okay, like just talk about the overall stack, and then specifically as so understanding customer needs on a continuous basis. What was the problem that triggered that led to you figuring out, okay, we need to like solve this problem, also equally well before we scale things up?
Yeah, for sure. And I think just like it's important to take like a step back as well. I think there's so much talk now in the industry of what matters. Does it matter speed? Does it matter moat? Does it matter brand? at 11 Labs, we're very good at shipping quickly. Very, very good at shipping quickly. A team of 6 engineers. We release really meaningful product updates every sort of 2 to 3 weeks. We launch at least a new capability on the app every month. And so because of that, we were able to grow very, very quickly. I think we're going into the hundreds and thousands of weekly active users now. Um, with a team of like 5 engineers, I mean, when we first engaged with Interpret, I think it was like four engineers or 3.5 to be precise, and myself. And so the biggest issue was that we had swathes of product feedback coming through. I would say upwards of hundreds and thousands of App Store reviews, customer support feedback that we're getting. And so the hardest part was, well, we're able to ship really quickly. How do we know we're going to the right thing? And making sense of that. How do we know where the pot, and then how do we know while we're shipping quickly that we're not letting the rest of the product degrade and having a great pulse on that? And so that was really the core issue, which was we have so much product feedback. We have a really small team. I can't be the bottleneck as the voice of the customer or the product manager or the growth lead. I need to really empower my team to be able to go and get these questions in a really meaningful way.
Yeah, yeah. And then maybe quickly to double down, I think like the initial instinct for a lot of teams is like, oh, we're trying to grow fast, we have ambitious goals, and we want to understand product feedback. Let's also build like a internal tool to like analyze that and
Yeah.
maintain that, which I can understand the instinct, but like I've always find a bit surprising. Talk to me about like how was that discussion like internally, and then how do you decide on like one way or the other, like what made more sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in terms of like this build or buy decision of only do what makes your beer taste better,
Yeah,
right? So we're a small lean team. We can only focus on the things that make, our product better, only really focus on the things that provide end user value. And so we did go through a bit of a bake-off period. I mean, I remember during the process we experimented and tried out. Already had some Claude skills around App Store reviews and whatever have you. And the biggest issue we kind of kept hitting up against was one, the second we want to add in other product feedback capabilities, so Reddit, Twitter, YouTube comments, Instagram comments, because we have a healthy sort of media presence as well. We just weren't able to scale that, and then we got into this never-ending loop of like, how do we create scraping? The second is like we have a relatively simple product under this on the surface, but quite complex under the hood. If you talk about just something like voice, we have voice design, voice cloning, text to speech, speech to text, or also people call voice to text. Text to speech is also called voice generation. So the biggest issue we had was we would try and use, one of these generic LLMs, and it would conflate all these issues into one.
right.
And so we were never able to get any meaningful insight as a result of this. And so you'd go in to understand, is there an issue with the voice cloning flow, and get about 20 miscellaneous answers from sometimes a very noisy user base as well, without getting the full plethora of feedback you can get. And that would put you throw you for a loop all the time.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I think one of the things like we talk about internally is like customers are not trained on how to give feedback. There's no
Yeah.
school of like, here's how you feedback product. They just say things, right?
Yeah.
Like so, it's not their job, right? Like they just say
No.
whatever they want in every format, and that it's like the business's job to uh you know pun intended, I guess, to interpret that basically on like
Yeah.
with the product context of like, okay, like in our context and what we're trying to build and the strategy. Here's this maps out basically, and make sure that no signals are not lost. So I think that definitely resonates. I guess moving on, like uh, curious, like maybe some probability thing. Once you set this up, how do you prioritize like what decisions are worth acting on, right? Like, so I think like you get like a customer intelligence platform like Enterpret, and I think you basically are able to align. But like, uh, how do you ensure that it becomes? How do you measure its success in terms of is it helping us ship faster? Is it helping us be more aligned? Just curious before we dive into some specific examples. Philosophically, how do you think about like the impact of like having like a a verified Switzerland third party, like a source of customer truth, basically.
Yeah, I think the main thing was we were shipping a ton of features, so we started to ship, crank a bunch of features. We knew in the metrics, okay, there's this driving some adoption, but when we looked at what should we iterate, or how should we iterate, um, we might get some very noisy power users who requested things from web, and that provided a ton of noise. But we weren't really able to get to the core truth answer, like what is our specific ICP, particularly as we went through the PMF journey, really, really demanding of us. So it was really helpful. And I think like the big thing we looked at was like, how did this drive an iteration moment that we wouldn't have gotten as a result of using
Mm.
Interpret? The second bit was purely from like an engagement standpoint, and I guess this is a little bit different, but we started to integrate it into some of our processes, and we have alerts, we have a bunch of different things that we use around it, around different feedback channels, and the biggest change was like, does this signal an issue to us that we never knew? Like, as a growth PM, I've squinted really heavily at user acquisition, installs, activation, retention. You don't get a crisp picture of like why something's happening. You tend to get a good idea of like, okay, there's an issue in activation, but you never get a signal on why. And so what the unlock for us was we're able to start overlaying that information from what we were getting quantitatively with sort of this qualitative information. And like when you have so much data, you do get a really, really clear signal about this. And then the final bit was like, we've talked about iteration. We've kind of figured out, okay, this is where we're going for the next 1 to 3 months was okay, like where's our strategy kind of guiding us? Particularly in an AI native company building on our own foundation model. One of the hard things is that we know that a lot of user behavior shifts as the model shifts. And so
Mm.
using Interpret helps us kind of like feed back some of those insights to our researchers as well. Like, hey, with this model, this is the feedback we're getting, and here's the verification and the size of it. Researchers love data. And then, based on that, also, this is how we know that this user behavior might shift with this new model that we're getting. How can we then, meet our product in time for that rather than playing a game of catch up?
Yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think like on this, like one of the things you said, which is like then making sure uh, two things are very interesting to me. One is like that model behavior, like obviously the models are getting you know uh, significantly better like every few weeks.
Creepily so, yeah,
So
yeah.
and it's almost like it's a new capability unlocked, which like then propagates to all application level products and which can drive a lot of changes, which we are seeing as well on our side. Um, and second is like, how do you ensure like that stays through with like other cross-functional teams? One other thing I've also seen, you folks do well is like bring along other cross-functional teams basically in this journey besides just like your small team of like aligning on what is the source of customer truth and like what else can we do to improve the experience based on voice of the customer besides the product, right? Like so maybe like would love to hear like some thoughts on it. How did that happen and like how do you what is the importance of that versus like making every team just doing its own thing?
Yeah, I would love to take extreme credit for this, that it was a super intentional decision where I turned around and said every team should get access to this customer context. But actually, it happened really organically. And looking back, it makes a ton of sense of why this was the case, right? What we kind of realized was we were often trying to answer the same question again and again in different ways. So what a I might look on like my user acquisition with my paid marketing team is like, why is there a sudden decline or our conversion rates or the cost per action we're trying to drive, a cost per lead we're trying to drive in a certain country dropping? Then in the product side, I might look at like, well, what are we changing in the onboarding activation flows? How are we managing fraud mechanisms? The engineering team is looking at certain like endpoint data that's coming through, say, a Grafana dashboard. And so we were all trying to answer this question in vastly different ways, all at the same time, and kind of treading on our toes for this. And so, what was really fascinating for me was, we enabled, I think, like Interpret inside our Slack chat. And someone asked one of these questions in this chat, and I
Mm.
went, well, there's an easy way to call upon this. And so ended up like tagging, I think it was the Interpret bot in Slack and asking a question around, hey, like, is this correlating to anything? And immediately you get some like product insights and then you're able to pull in some quantitative. And that was quite helpful, right? Because suddenly this is now pulling together teams around this shared customer understanding rather than, one team looking at maybe the paid ads comments, then querying me, then querying another team. You're pulling different notes across the thing. Suddenly you've got this all in the one place. And then what we found is like that's very reactive, but proactively, we're all trying to solve the same conversation in similar ways. One of my mentors taught me about products and marketing as a whole is that, you know, marketing generates value outside the product and captures attention, and then product's role and responsibility is to continue to generate even more value in the product and then capture it, right?
Yep.
We're just chatting about the same, Your messaging is your in-product copy. This is all different levels of abstraction, and what we're kind of if you're not operating from the same customer understanding and customer context, you're kind of tripping over yourself, and then you get into these painful worlds. And I've been there as a founder, I've been there as an operator, where your marketing team is sending, users to you that don't fit with your product. Your product team is building towards something that doesn't fit with where your go-to-market is. You're all operating and shipping from different standing points and different viewpoints. And the machine kind of falls apart. And when you're shipping very quickly, that gulf and divide becomes very quick, very quickly. And suddenly you found that like after a month, you're talking to completely separate people about completely separate things with a
Right.
completely separate set of understanding.
Yeah. Thank you for your example. I think just to make it concrete, one of the things which I've always found fascinating was sort of the work like you and the team did around like leveraging Enterpret for customer intelligence for just the overall monetization strategy. So like you're a small team, you have ambitious goals, but like even as we are building an AI application software, it's a hard thing, right? Like understanding the pricing approach, like the subscription framework, the credits that you want to give, like an AI
Mm.
application product, like these are very, very hard problems to crack. And especially at the scale, like, the upside or the downside of like just not being thoughtful, strategic, and continuously updating it is very, very hard. And there is definitely a loop of like watching the revenue metrics, but also the associated feedback with any sort of experimentation or change. And I just thought like your team did that like really, really well in a way that like I feel like we learned a lot just watching that. And it's probably one of the best examples I've seen of like team leveraging continuous analysis and action on customer intelligence to move the needle on monetization basically, which obviously resulted in obviously of like 10 million plus ARR inside of 6 months, which is phenomenal. Uh, Maybe just talk about that. Like how did like that journey start, and like what just like how you've been able to leverage cracking, understanding the monetization approach of like a very complicated level, basically of like both at like a pricing level, pricing tiers, subscription, but also the credits you want to give for each usage on the mobile platform, and like continuously tracking feedback with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, credits and tokens and pricing in the AI age is super frustrating, super difficult. It's hard to kind of understand where you fit. Everyone has their own fiat version. I think we were kind of lucky to an extent where like there was some lore internally we could work on. But I mean, mapping that to mobile is a completely different use case. You've got different billing cycles, mechanisms, pricing and packaging. You have very different um, user segment and price sensitivity. So there was a lot for us to kind of figure out again. And I think what was particularly useful is like we had a pricing and packaging plan that was kind of working, but we also knew that like it was not sustainably growing. We were hitting against a few walls. And one of like, to describe the story in like sort of 2 to 3 acts to be very tangible, Act One was we launched this pricing packaging. It was doing well, but we weren't really seeing it work on like we were really pushing up against some of the unit economic constraints, in terms of like user retention and activation journeys, against our own COGS and cost to acquire, for example. Then the biggest issue, then we sort of went through this game of like, well, let's understand what the user feedback is. And so if we looked at the user feedback, and this is going to Act Two, very layperson perspective was users are unhappy that doing anything in the app results in credits being used. And
Mm.
that's just a generic user behavior, right? And so, the customer support team would say, oh, users are confused. We need to, they're unhappy. We should have different capabilities, around maybe when they regenerate content that doesn't use credits versus when you have like an upfront generation. Tested that, had some good PMF there. We then went, okay, they said, okay, like you're not clear enough about the way that you're showing the credits and the credit consumption behavior. Did that, but then growth took a hit. And so we kind of went in this loop for a little bit. And what was really fascinating was when we dove deeper into the behaviors of why users hated credits being consumed beyond the obvious surface level insight. People hate spending for things when they could potentially get it for free. Um, was essentially that like there was a lack of clarity around why or when a credit is consumed, how it's
Mm.
consumed, how does a credit relate to a bit of voice or video or image being
Yeah.
generated? How can I control my credit consumption? How can I know when my credits are reaching their end and I can kind of upgrade on what that looks like. And so that then sparked a whole series of work, UX in the app around, when we show behaviors.
Mm,
So one small change that was an insight actually from something we got was rather than just constantly showing this credit counter, which is like the easy default and hurting your growth, when we know that this, prompt or this action is going to consume more than 25% of your remaining balance, particularly when you're like at your 50 or 100% of your balance, we should show up a little like, hey, just a reminder, like a little red warning. Hey, this is going to use a lot of your thing. It's okay if you want to continue. That was really, really effective. Small little UX patterns like having a credit sort of progress circle around your profile icon in the app. All these small little sharp changes was really, really helpful for us. Also solving the problem that we came from regenerations, which was tidying up, being clear about the fact that regenerations don't consume credits and that you get like free regenerations for free. And then the next sort of interesting insight, which was kind of going to Act 3, was like there is a class of users that don't want upfront subscriptions, particularly, mobile app. We've got Android users, large segment of users in, Southeast Asia, Africa,
mm,
Latin America, especially. Um, layperson perspective is we could have left that revenue on the floor and said, well, those people are never going to convert. But actually,
mm.
again, we dove deeper into the insight. They don't like subscriptions. They don't like the price point we're going for. So instead, we've started to experiment with one-time credit packs that have come as an
Mm.
insider result, and then we've been able to follow the reception of that. And really understand, okay, like this is something that's driving value for them. There are some constraints and issues we're dealing with in terms of COGS, in terms of user behavior, but it's meeting their need. And now we've got like a healthy roadmap of, the next things to sort of chip away on.
Yeah, that's really really fascinating, man. I think it's such a great example of just like directly connecting feedback to revenue, basically. In this case,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
exactly.
couldn't be more a direct mapping. I guess like one thing like I'm also curious about Tanmay, like shifting gears is like uh, it's been very interesting for me to watch at 11 Labs, but also like other customers is like uh, the collapsing of the UIs basically in the enterprise, and like where you obviously you consume like the team consumes like Enterpret in a headless manner, connecting our MCP server, but you also have like other MCP tools internally. Also, we're beginning to see some patterns. You've worked, you've built products at like at Amazon, at Canva, another great customer centered company. Uh, you've at your own startup and out 11 Labs. I'm curious, like where do you see this going, right? Like, how do you see, like, from your perspective, the future operating system of product management and growth, basically, uh, and like the pros and cons of it, basically.
Yeah, it's a very loaded question, and like we should do like a soundbite from this, and then maybe come back in a year and be like, was Tanmay roughly right, or was he way off base, or
Yeah.
is this true at all? I think like particularly where I'm playing and like the role of a PM has shifted, where product and growth were stretched across so many different fields. The biggest thing that matters, I find, is like not my capability to go into individual tools. So if I look at, Facebook ads, which is one area I'm focusing on at the moment,
Hmm.
my stack is Interpret. I've got some data analyst capabilities there. We're directly into Facebook, creative strategy sort of capabilities to extract and understand the creatives. And so in that stack there, what I find really useful is actually having like projects and repos to effectively have brains, right? And I kind of use, a mix of Claude code plus these various MCPs to have these sort of brains and stacks and like I have my own sub-agent structures and skills to go and extract insights and work on that specific area, and iterate on work while I then, focus on product for a little bit, and then I'm able to bring the product insights. And so what I'm finding is that I'm not having to be on the tools to be, I guess, like be on the tools. I'm not as much on the tools, but I'm in the prompts
Hmm.
where I'm not having to go into, say, the Facebook Ads Manager and learn how to ship these ads. I've got like, Google Drive. I'm able to ship them, be able to give feedback to agencies and internal partners on how like on new creative angles based on customer, voice of the customer sort of quotes we're getting based on iteration cycles and whatever have you. And so what I'm trying to say in a really roundabout way as I sort of collect myself is that what I'm really finding is that increasingly so, the best thing you can do is find ways to bring all this context together and like, Interpret plays a really key part of it, post hog. different like monitoring capabilities, different data entry points around
Mm.
CAC, BigQuery, whatever have you, and then sort of set up your workflows and skills so that you can really go and amplify your work. And then you just kind of your responsibility then is to make sure that you're asking the relevant questions. It's almost like you're a manager of a team of sub agents to go and kick off and
Yep.
do this sort of research for you. What this means, like, I don't think this is going to be like a SaaS apocalypse or whatever have you. It just means that the shape of these tools is going to change pretty significantly.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I think internally we call it like, how do you become like a manager of infinite minds, basically, which is like you have
Exactly.
this is like, how do you like or like making sure the data is accurate, but orchestrating the flow between them. And I think a lot can be done. And I guess on a similar note, like if we have in the audience, like team members who are just starting on this journey of like becoming more AI native in like how they understand the voice of the customer, either from like a product perspective or a customer experience or customer support perspective. Uh, like what would you recommend they do in the first 30 or 60 days, right? Like how can someone like completely change just how they approach learning and acting on customer feedback to build better products in today's age? Like what would you recommend the first 90 days to be?
I think that the easiest thing you can do is like we all kind of have a lot of data, hopefully. We have random qualitative data from user emails, notifications, customer support tickets. The simplest thing you can do is try and collate that into something, CSV, a whatever have you, and then throw that into a simple, Claude project or ChatGPT, whatever your LLM of choice is, and just try and ask some like intense questions. And you'll find that the first round is not great. You'll have to go and educate the LLM. Hey, this is my product. This is the deal. This is what you should understand. Um, that's probably like the most important thing. You'll find that like, and the biggest thing as well is like use it to really push your assumptions and test your assumptions. So I like to tell any LLM like by default assume I'm wrong and question everything that I say, right? And then when you
Interesting.
come back and question it, come back with like almost citations and quotes and data points. Be very precise, be laconic, be very dense, very Amazonian. I think I've probably inherited
Yeah.
it from there. And so like that's really important because then I think you start really expressing the value of these different tools, right?
Mm.
People often joke, I know there's like that South Park episode where ChatGPT is overly compliant. But you can push your, AI tools to be quite critical, and really push your thinking, and particularly as models improve. I think once you've kind of gotten to that point, okay, you've gone through the exercise of manually getting that context into these tools. The next thing you need to think about is like, how can I have repeatable systems to get this context in? And connectors on Claude or MCP are fantastic ways to do this, right? And
Yep.
often they come packaged with skills, they come packaged with sub agents, and whatever have you, and plugins. And so suddenly, this is not a one-off exercise, this is a regular recurring exercise where you have this context coming through. And then the next thing you need to do is go, okay, what are some regular tasks that I'm doing? A classic example is every Monday I run through kind of a WBR with our team, and well, we have our weekly kickoff, and I run through some of the key metrics and some key customer quotes. Um, I just have a Claude job now, and it just drops something in my Slack, right?
Mm.
It pulls some Interpret customer data, pulls some postdoc things, pulls some BigQuery things. It gives like me sort of a voiceover that I can give with some particular analysis, or root cause analysis for some of the things that we're seeing. And it's been great. And I almost know like when I see that on like a Monday, okay, I'm set, this is my game plan, and this is how I'm going to shape my weekly meeting. And it saves me like 30 to 45 minutes before like a really critical sort of tone set for the week.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing. Maybe just to operationalize this in like a ritual perspective, let's just say talk about like a new feature launch or product launch, right? So when like leading up to the launch, like what tracking are you setting up across like different like systems, like from an analytics or feedback perspective and others? And then on the
Yeah.
launch day and the first couple of weeks of a product launch, since the team is shipping very fast, I'm assuming you've gotten very good at like those rituals. Like maybe just like talk through that, like what that looks like in like a for a AI native company.
Yeah, so we made a bet a couple of months back about having templates in the app. And like templates are just simplified down is like instead of having to do these multi-step image, video, music, voiceover, prompting capabilities, you can just drop some content in and you get a really high quality piece of content on the back end. And so in the lead up to, we're obviously shipping and testing and prototyping the product. Um, but then we're also going through and figuring out, okay, like what's our analytics stack that we need? What are the different events we want to track? Um, what are the different like BigQuery, backend data modeling capabilities we want to have so we can track this longitudinally? And then sort of going into it as well, like, okay, what are the different things we want to understand? I'm shaping the go-to-market message. Um, I'm looking at like some of the different notes and flavors that are coming from users. And so it's like, oh, hey, I find it really complicated to um, prompt sort of things. And so, one of the messaging pieces we had was like skip the prompt, tap the template, right? As kind of a
Mm.
note there. So we're sort of going and using all of this to frame the go-to-market. And then coming on launch day, the first thing is like, what's the initial user reaction? 11 Labs loves a good launch. I think you'll struggle if you go to our Twitter account to not find something meaningful launched or multiple meaningful things launched every day. It's gotten to the point where we
Yeah.
have to separate into sub-brands, so that everyone
Wow.
can have their specific moment. And so you want to make sure that when that launch happens, you're engaging with their customer feedback that's coming through, but then also able to kind of step back and go, what is their reaction here?
Mm.
And so like one of the really interesting insights we had with sort of templates was, the content is half of the product experience. We had invested, but we hadn't probably invested far enough. And so we need to really go and reinvest in that. And that came via not just the quantitative figures of like, user retention on this feature and like some of the activation figures, which actually look quite great on surface level, but then sort of the feedback we got of like, I would love if you had templates about this, and I don't feel like these are kind of really slick marketing, but they're not really fun to play with, or like,
Yep.
hey, they're kind of marketing, but they're most, X focused versus Y. And so you're able to really do that, and we set up a dashboard for that that we kind of then attacked, and we had like a specific initiative, and so the initiative team would go and look at that every week within Interpret, and we'd look at like qualitative information we're seeing there and the quantitative again. So it's kind of this fun game of like balancing the two off against each other.
Yeah, yeah, very, 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 very helpful and uh, kind of awesome that within any same day you can have multiple launches at 11 Labs and
Yeah,
you have to compete for resources. Okay, what even gets launched on a given day? That's pretty
yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I want to make sure like we have time for questions from the audience as well. Folks, if you have any questions, like feel free to put them in chat, and we'll try to make sure that we can get some of your questions. Otherwise, I can definitely continue the conversation. But eager to see what questions people have.
But, okay, yeah. Samir, you're gonna hold me to this, okay? We'll have to repost the soundbite in a year and see if I'm come true.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely brave to make predictions in this era, which is like, but if they do come true, it's pretty hard. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for
Um,
sure. Yeah, I'm happy to maybe kick off with that one. I think there's one in the chat. I haven't looked at the Q&A yet. So I think Samir, you've asked, what keeps you at night looking forward at 11 Labs? So many things. I think on a high level, like we're growing so quickly, like doing justice to that growth curve, right, is really important. Like when in a company that's super high growth, especially your initiative, when it's growing, 4, 5, 10% week on week, can feel like you're pale in comparison to the rest of the business. So
mm,
how are you doing this? And I think like the other bit is like as a company that does our own models and applied, how are we expressing the depth and capability of our model in this application layer in the best way possible for our chosen user segment? And how can we make sure that we're doing it in a way that we're not potentially cannibalizing what could be, another application layer bet that we have? So making sure that we all exist in the right system where we're building for the right users is really important.
yeah. Maybe another really good question is like, and this is also really interesting because I think the voice AI space is pretty crowded for different use cases, but especially on the mobile, I guess. How do you think about the competitive landscape and like how do you think about positioning the product? I think one thing you've also done really well is like, which I wish more people did is like you also deeply try to understand the praises and customer feedback really well to help shape positioning. So would like maybe like, tied to that, how do you think about positioning in a competitive category and then like the importance of like positive customer feedback and extracting signals from that also equally well as like, negative constructive customer feedback.
I feel like when it comes to this, like so many products are coming out, I think like my kind of hot take is we live in an AI bubble, and so we feel super nervous all the time that like everyone's used this AI product and Anthropic or whatever's released X and this product has died. And I think that's completely incorrect, right? Um, we're still 1% of the journey into like AI
Yeah.
adoption, right? And so really the important thing to do is rather than being super competitive focused should be competitor aware, but rather than be competitor focused, the biggest thing you need to do is figure out like, okay, for the other 99% of the universe, what do we need to do and make true so that they come in to use our product and we earn that right to, in a way that makes them feel really comfortable and we get over all these issues around AI products that people tend to feel like, it's copying people, it's not high quality, it's low quality, it's slop. Those are the really things I think deeply about, particularly you know, as a company like 11 Labs, which takes a lot of pride in the quality of the things we do and the fact that we work with creators to, pay them out for their voices and whatever have you. So really interesting question that we tend to balance internally a lot.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for answering. Another question I can take on, which I think is interesting, is what is one product change you made from customer feedback that looked small but had an outsized impact on like revenue, retention, or how they viewed your product? Yeah.
We had this really simple one. So we had like a initial when we launched image and video, we had this constraint where with image, you could only do three per day, right? And so we had like a little ticker on the bottom of like the prompt box, three per day. And people kept complaining that it wasn't clear. And so we made it red. We made it like green. We tried like a few different colors. We tried all these different things. And the dumbest thing we did was just on top of we actually copied this from ChatGPT. I'll give them credit for this. We put a little like on top of the prompt box, a little like slider that pops up saying, as you hit the generate and it's loading, hey, you have two remaining today. Hey, you have one remaining today.
Mm.
Hey, you're out. And then as a prompt came up, we had a little like link to go and subscribe. And so what was really fascinating was we saw a sharp decline in the complaints about not having clarity there. And then what was even more fascinating, conversely, was people were proactively upgrading as a result, right?
Mm.
Because instead
Interesting.
of making that a friction moment, you said, hey, like, well, like, you're enjoying this product, you're getting value. Do you want to just keep it going without hitting a hard constraint before being forced to pay?
Yeah. Yeah. That's it made a friction moment to an opportunity moment. That's
Yeah,
which
yeah,
which
yeah.
is very fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question is like, how do you decide which feedback to ignore when your loudest users are not your core users?
I'd love to actually go back to like Canva here because this is a big thing we dealt with. I'm sure like Vern, you have some stories here, but we had like this group called Canva Certified Creatives, amazing power users. They're affiliates. They created a ton of content. Um, their Facebook group was just panning Canva all the time. Like as a PM, I was afraid to go in there. And the biggest issue we had was like they were intense power users. They wanted like complex capabilities. And like what we deeply understood was like the value of a product like Canva was one simple editor to rule it all. And we had to really serve the 80% of users, not the 20%.
Yeah.
And so you're playing this constant game of understanding, have we treaded too deep into the power user territory? Is this something that they want really they want, or or is this something that would empower like a larger base? And so you constantly try and add a bit of a razor to it. Like if I gave this tool and a consumer, it's a little bit easier because you can do the mom test and you can hand it to your partner, you can hand it to your like younger 16-year-old cousin and kind of go, hey, well, would this make it a little bit easier? Would you understand things? How does this make you feel? Do you get more clarity? Um, Always trying to apply that sort of like Occam's razor to any of the requests you're getting. And I imagine, Vern, you probably see this all the time in like B2B enterprise as well, where someone comes in real time and asks like like maybe a sales call comes through and you have to play that trade-off game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the interesting thing is in B2B enterprise sales is like there is a power law in revenue, which is like you can have a customer that is 20x, 25x of like your average contract value. And like obviously that makes you do like things that you typically would not do. Yeah, and there's also this like lock-in period that come up for 2, 3 period. I think in for like product-led growth companies, basically, or where the feedback is more democratized. Like let's say you took like Netflix, right? You have like 300 million subscribers.
Yeah.
Everyone pays like $10 a month. Like who are you going to ignore? Like, everyone is equally important. So I think that's where like joining with metadata, like who's coming and what they're saying, and aligning with your internal strategy and like what pain you're willing to take is very important. So I think in B2B enterprise, it does become very different because like one customer can dictate some like slight deviation from core strategy, but like especially in like I think for you, right, like 11 Labs Mobile, right? Like yeah, there's no one customer that's like 20% of revenue, like or 25% of revenue. It's
Yeah.
like you have to build for like everyone equally, and that balance between of like how much power user variation you
Yeah.
want versus there is some amount of uh like acceptable and almost intentional unhappiness you want from your power users because you want to serve the broader rest. I think that's a
Yeah.
very interesting, that's a very difficult
Yeah.
and interesting line to balance, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I used to see this talk that I think Alex, the CMO of Meta, did of Facebook, which is like you're always trying to optimize for the marginal user, right, in growth. The
Yeah.
marginal user that might fall off the activation journey, the marginal user that might churn, the marginal user that just came to 90% of the value but didn't get the last 10%. And so that means that there's a certain cohort of people that are going to get annoyed that you send an extra push notification or an email, or like there's you didn't give them that extra little capability.
Yeah. 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 Maybe one other question is like, do you folks do like traditional market user research, or like do you just like look at public signal? What do you think about the variation and the importance of both?
I would say we don't do traditional market user research in like the old school, we get a think tank of people together. We hire like a market user research company and they go and survey a set of users and come back with some thoughts. Instead, what we tend to do is focus instead on like understanding what data points we're getting from the market in terms of competitor dynamics. What are we seeing from like model capabilities? Weird quirk of our company is being like a model company as well. So what are the dynamics we're getting from model? What are we seeing from model uplift and different changes that are happening there? And then what we look at is really like, okay, once we've shipped something, like what's the iteration cycle? So I would say, yeah, deep sort of market user research, no, but we do go through like the classic MVP process. So, a new feature that we had, we went through design partnerships as kind of like our version of market user research based on an insight that we had internally. We then went to market with it. Now we're looking at the user research to kind of iterate on it. We're looking at the quantitative. That's kind of our process.
Yeah, got it. Got it. Okay. Awesome. All right. Maybe we can do one last question. We're coming up on time. Um, uh, Yeah, I think maybe if you can talk about this is a good question. Like, how do product growth and engineering resolve like contradictory signals when deciding what to build next? Uh, oh, I guess if you have something in Enterpret, you should not have contradictory signals. Like, you have like the absolute truth. But like,
I was
but I'm
about to say
curious.
that, yeah.
Yeah. But I guess like there can be some interpretation, and it's like if you look at the holistic data, but like just maybe talk about like internally between growth and engineering teams at 11 Labs, like what are the typical discussion or debate topics around, basically?
Yeah, I mean, the classic one with engineering is like, are we pushing too hard on this onboarding flow? How we feature, like, in terms of paywall conversion, and like, are we trying to
Hmm.
optimize too heavily that? Have we pushed this feature? And I think like the biggest thing that has solved this, frankly, is making sure we're all on the same page, right? Like, these are our goals, right? This is what we're marching towards. We're willing to accept, when we're running experiment, a hit on these things in service of these things, and really bringing everyone on that journey because I think typically this comes from like a misalignment of incentives and outcomes and perspectives, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so if you then have that and then you have the right customer context, rather than like competing information and you're duking it out, what you have and you're duking it out for like different priorities, what you're trying to do is bring competing information to get to the definitive answer, right? And it changes the
yeah,
shape of that conversation entirely.
yeah. But can you elaborate on that?
I mean, so like on one hand, like instead of like an engineer coming to me saying, "Oh, we're over optimizing, we're hurting, paywall conversion by like pushing paywalls too soon," hypothetically. Instead, if the engineer is aligned that revenue growth is a key goal for us,
Right.
that we're doing with activation or we're talking about an activation flow. So what he might come and say instead is like, Tam may have done some deeper analysis. I believe that we're pushing paywall conversion too much. And what that's resulting in is we're converting them much sooner, but actually over the long term, our month one retention is down and we're not getting a full lifetime value from this user,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So it's a lot more nuanced and they're trying to get the definitive answer. And then I'm like, okay, cool. Like I hear your point.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. So I think alignment on goals and alignment on like customer truth from different perspectives, quantitative, qualitative,
Yeah,
um, that basically allows for like healthy discussion debate from the right perspective. It allows you to like ship fast basically and in the same direction. Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah, makes sense. Awesome. Tanmay, thank you so much for your time, man. This was awesome. I think we live in special times of building products, and 11 Labs is definitely leading the charge. So thank you for taking the time to share your wisdom on the approach to building products in today's era. So I think it was like super fun. Thank you all for joining and your active participation. We'll share the recording out, but this has been a pleasure. So thank you, Tanmay.
Thanks, team. Thanks so much, team. Take care.